there are hundreds of thousands of individual pieces of work sort of linking many diseases and your risk of getting them to, poor nutrition or low nutrient levels, if you're looking at things individually. So I think the food choices and moving, breathing, most of the benefits of exercise come from the movement and the breathing. There's no magic at flogging your heart a million miles an hour, for instance. So, just like with, how much water do people drink or how much protein do people drink? Again, exercise. There's often a whole bunch of people who are doing too much, and heading for a wheelchair and joint replacements later in life. And there are other people who are just sitting around, barely able to lift the remote controller, change something on Netflix. Most of us want to know, well, what's the sensible, optimal kind of best bang for the buck way of getting, the best prevention. As with, if you're outside and you're exercising or being active with other people, again, exercise with other people actually is shown to be more beneficial than the same amount of exercise, on your own or in a gym or something. There's the social aspects. There is the being outdoors in daylight. The sun story isn't just about vitamin D. It turns out that the warmth part of the sun's light is just as important.
I lost you there a minute, Mark. Matt, what were you saying? So are we saying that there's other photochemical effects on the skin from the sun in addition to producing vitamin D?
Yeah, nitric oxide.
Right.
Heard of. It's a molecule the body makes, and it turns out that has to be made in the skin. And you want lots of nitric oxide in the blood vessels, and people with diabetes, on certain medications, people with high insulin don't make enough nitric oxide in the blood vessels, but then they may make too much in the brain elsewhere. So I like to think of it more as the sunshine story than just about vitamin D. And this is why some of the intervention trials of vitamin D have been a bit disappointing. You give vitamin D to people who've got hypertension or diabetes, and the results are not necessarily, overwhelmingly good. And yet you can correlate certainly vitamin D deficiency with their chances of getting these disorders in the first place. So it's turning out that often low vitamin D is a marker for other things that are also wrong in the body.
Like nitric oxide. Yeah.
Sorry?
Like nitric oxide.
Yes, that's right. And this is a story that's only just beginning.
Of course, that's going to dilate the blood vessels, isn't it? It's going to lower the blood pressure.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Many of the medications that we take for blood pressure, including the ACE inhibitors and the ARBs, the blockers, around which there's still a bit of a question at the moment because they work by interfere or affecting the ACE2 receptor. A lot of those are working because they're making up for the nitric oxide deficit that you find in the lining of blood vessels.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. So
I never thought of it in those terms. Yeah. Yeah.
So certain things will help you make nitric oxide. Being able to breathe through your nose is another one. It turns out that the lining of the sinuses also we make nitric oxide. So people with allergies and blocked noses or broken noses or whatever, don't do so well. But the skin is it's the biggest organ in the body.
Yeah, I've got you now. You were saying the skin is the biggest organ in the body. What was the point from that? Sorry.
Well, it's absolutely huge. So it makes no surprise that there are many functions of the skin. It's an organ of elimination. It's not just to keep the weather out and keep our insides in. And there's probably a lot still yet to be discovered. It has its own microbiome. The bacteria that live on us, as well as in us, are very relevant to immunity. I hope that in a few weeks or months there's similar excitement about the work being done around zinc. Melatonin's another one. And this seems to be the thing that gives children largely their protection. And we know that elderly people make much less melatonin. And I was just reading now that at peak melatonin production, a 3-year-old has about 10 times more melatonin in the blood than an elderly person. And melatonin, has many different jobs, but it seems particularly relevant to the kind of gene induction in important cells in the immune system. But also it can mitigate genes in the virus that turns down the infectivity there. So again, melatonin occurs in nature. It's very, very cheap to produce. Zinc is very, very cheap to make. And I do wonder whether, it does keep coming back to just this profit motive. Where's the money for anybody in particular in getting this information out there?
Yeah, that's right. So just go back a bit on the melatonin, Matt. So we've got this pineal gland up here somewhere, haven't we? So
yeah,
near the optic chiasma. So is that where the melatonin is produced physiologically?
Yeah, that's the pineal gland is actually right deep in the middle of the brain. It's right in the middle, and it was dismissed until only 30, 40 years ago. It's probably just being irrelevant and a sort of vestigial remnant of our lizard brain. But it's absolutely fundamental to our sort of day-night cycles. But we make melatonin in the gut as well. Other cells make melatonin too. It's a very powerful antioxidant. And in fact, it's the only antioxidant that we make ourselves that is fat and water soluble. So it's able to be active inside the cell in the watery bits, but also around the cell membrane and protect that too. So it's a very important antioxidant, and it certainly has immune modifying effects as well. And it's looking like, as people are now looking at the genetic effects of melatonin as a gene transcriber. So this is about the epigenetics. Where, it's not so much the genes we inherit, but how they're affected and switched on and off by
how they're turned on and off. Yeah.
Turns out melatonin's looking very important there. And there have been some people in some of the ICUs right from the word go with the COVID thing using melatonin, and reporting some effects. But again, it's hard to find much of a splash about it in the media. And I think the other big question we've still got, and you've alluded to this a number of times, is around zinc, and particularly zinc as pertains to hydroxychloroquine. There's a battle royal going on, it seems, isn't there? Is chloroquine, any good or not? And certainly zinc metabolism and getting zinc, which is a natural antiviral, into cells seems to be a particular way by which chloroquine works, and has always been known to work, actually. So,
it's known that the chloroquine is an inophore to let the zinc into the cytosol of the cell, where it can exert its antiviral effects.
That's right. Yeah, that is right. And zinc deficiency is fairly common. It's a more expensive blood test to do for people, so it's not often that labs will do it. But certainly zinc and its relation to immunity, has been known for quite a while, and they've looked at this a lot in third world infectious diseases and gastroenteritis vulnerability and things.
What sort of doses would you prescribe there? About 30 milligrams a day, or?
I think the RDA is quite low for zinc. I think it's knocking only around about 10 milligrams. 10 to 20. You can find up to 30 or 50 milligrams in a decent supplement. But it's as much about, why aren't we eating foods with zinc in? And a lot of those foods, our good sources of zinc have been demonized over the years. Your red meat and your eggs. And eggs are in and out of fashion. It seems every decade, aren't they?
Yeah, sure.
We can't all get the best oysters, of course, but nuts and seeds have got zinc and things as well. But you use up an awful lot of zinc, mitigating oxidative stress. Men
especially.
Yes, well, we lose it sexually, but also zinc is a very important cofactor for our main antioxidant enzyme in the blood called superoxide dismutase, and you will know of this one. And zinc is a cofactor. So it's involved in buffering. So
basically, the enzyme wouldn't work without the zinc.
Well, that's right. And that, of course, is why we need minerals. We build the enzymes ourselves. They're just proteins. But if you haven't got the enzyme, the mineral cofactor from the diet, the enzymes don't work properly.
Yeah. What would be the problems with taking too much zinc? Talking too much.
Ironically, if you take too much zinc can impair immunity. So too much zinc can impair immunity. But again, you have to be mining zinc or taking, lots and lots of zinc, for quite a long time. And it's the same with selenium as well. There've been much vaunted kind of concerns about selenium toxicity knocking around and the danger of taking selenium in supplements. But again, you have to have a lot of exposure to a lot for quite a long time to get sick. So, a really good example of the zinc story now is that the best evidence-based treatment for dealing with warts in children. Most kids get warts on their fingers or their knees or their toes at some point, and then we develop a lifelong immunity. But in some kids, they're really, really troublesome. Actually, just giving kids zinc helps them clear up. It's just like magic. And yet, so you're applying a nutritional solution to what's actually probably a nutritional deficiency problem. We know how important zinc is, particularly in the child's much more thymic-based immune control and development and regulation. So you're probably just mitigating a bit of zinc deficiency in these kids because zinc is depleted in growing children. It's really important and used up a lot when we're growing.
Of course, warts are viral, aren't they? So again, the antiviral effect of the zinc.
Yes. Yeah. So zinc is allowing lymphocytes to be matured. It's maintaining the hormone production by the thymus. And it's a cofactor of all sorts of other enzymes as well. And I was wondering for a few months whether the issue with men having a high mortality, having worse outcomes with COVID, was around zinc. But there's some work now coming out looking at estriol, which is one of the main human estrogens that we make. And it's looking like estriol may be having similar sort of epigenetic protective effects that melatonin does, which may explain why women at every age seem to have an advantage, except in the elderly, because an 80-year-old man has probably got higher estrogen levels by then than an 80-year-old woman. Because it seems that protective effect disappears. And you made the point the other day, which I think was a good one, that it may be just there's less men left to get COVID, because they do live on average 4 or 5 years less than women do.
So I wondered that because I heard this estrogen hypothesis about women being protected and thought, well, most 55-year-old women after the menopause, their estrogen levels are in the boots, they're virtually none. But if the estrogen, when they're young, had triggered an epigenetic change, then that would be a lifelong epigenetic change.
Yes, that's right. There's certainly plenty of estrogen in most women still knocking around after menopause. It does drop. It drops about 40%. It's progesterone that goes to zero.
Okay.
Because the ovaries are the only source. But we make estrogen in the skin and things. But all estrogen is made first from testosterone. So women make buckets of testosterone just as much as we do, but then they aromatize most of it into estrogen. And one of the cruel tricks of aging for men is that we start to convert more of our testosterone into estrogen. Hence the man boobs and the rest of it. It's really pretty cool. And actually, interestingly, zinc is a cofactor for aromatase. Zinc mitigates the rise in aromatase, which happens as we get older, which in men causes them to convert more of the testosterone to estrogen rather than leave it as testosterone.
So with plenty of zinc, you keep more of your testosterone.
Absolutely, you put it. Yeah.
Well, how could I increase my melatonin, Matt? Will going in the sun help my melatonin? Or?
Absolutely, it will. There are some key behaviors that really help maintain that kind of sense for the brain of when it's day and when it's night. And being exposed to daylight in the early part of the day, so getting outdoors, is really important. There are cues that the brain gets given to tell us when we need to be awake and when we need to be asleep. And another very important one that we really miss out on mostly now is the dusk. The sense that the light is now starting to fade. And essentially the brain takes its cue from that, or ideally, and then ideally a couple of hours after that we're asleep. So we start to produce melatonin, this is what makes us feel sleepy and gets us ready for the brain to be switched off. on things. Peak production is usually about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, assuming that we've gone to bed at a reasonable time.
Yeah.
But the thing that modern life, of course, does to wreck that whole circadian balance is screens.
Yeah.
And we're all staring at screens, and we're all obsessed with the latest research on COVID on our phones and
absolutely,
like that. So there is an ability to kind of download apps that take the blue light out, because it's the blue white light part of the natural daylight, but also that is much more prevalent in screens, because the backlight that picks up the color is a very sort of intense blue white fluorescent light. That's telling the brain it's midday, basically, because that's when in nature the blue is at its highest, is when the sun's right overhead, and things. So there's an epidemic of people that can't sleep, and especially teenagers. And I see a lot of particularly young adult men who are deficient in two things. They're deficient in vitamin D, and they're deficient in testosterone, because they've spent their formative years basically gaming in their bedrooms, not sleeping, or going to sleep finally when they're so exhausted that they can't sleep because they're wired from being on the screen and gaming and things, and eventually they'll go to sleep late and then they have to get up early. So I see a lot of teenagers in my office with bags under their eyes, and I know that they're just shortchanging themselves. But they're also these kids are not out reaching peak muscle development, while the hormonal influence, which is mainly testosterone to grow those muscles, and it's active in women as well, are not having a chance to reach their peak. And I know we're digressing a little bit here, but the hormonal story is so integral to everything. So if you're not reaching peak muscle mass, and peak testosterone receptors in those muscles, then it takes less testosterone production to occupy all those receptors. So the testes just don't need to make as much testosterone for sort of reasonable blood levels. But testosterone is much more than just about libido and interest in sex. It's about motivation, drive, energy, optimism. We do all those crazy, stupid, young guy things when we're full of testosterone, don't we? Impulsiveness and risk taking and things. It's a bit dangerous. And there's also a thought that maybe testosterone is what makes makes men, gives them man flu, and that there's an overly aggressive, immune response that can cause the collateral damage behind things like LDS and the cytokine storm. But it's probably more about that we just don't have enough of the estriol that the women do, that explains the man flu side of things. But these people are shortchanging themselves on the basics. They're not moving, they're not breathing, they're not being active, they're not sleeping, and they're not building their muscles. And I talk to kids who sleep with their phones switched on under their pillows, so they don't miss a status update or a text or something like that. And I think this I think this is the third hidden the hidden epidemic is just poor quality sleep. And people not making enough melatonin,
and the immunological consequences of poor quality sleep as well.
Absolutely.
Good sleep really boosts immunity, doesn't it?
And it may be that it's mainly around melatonin. I'm sure there'll be other things that we don't know about. There's a lot of house cleaning that goes on in the brain. But I would say to people, if you don't already have, one of the apps for just making your screen, a slightly amber orange, in the evening, you should. And as the evening goes on, if you gradually turn the lighting down in the house to kind of mimic dusk, and one of the problems with the new lighting, the LED lights, these very intensely bright lights that have a very single frequency, is that they can bugger up your sleep and your melatonin as well. And certainly with children, you can do a lot of really good work just getting the lighting changed, and buying the amber or the soft tone, the soft tone things. And I've taken to the habit, because I've seen it work very well for other people, of wearing amber orange sunglasses in the evening. If I want to watch the telly, or I've got to do some work on the computer. You can just get some because that blocks out the blue.
Yeah.
And you do that, and you'll be nodding off from crawling into bed at 10 o'clock. Whereas normally, I might still be wide awake at 11:30 or midnight if I've been working.
It's so wonderfully non-pharmacological, isn't it? It's just a restoration of the natural rhythm of life that we've been designed, evolved for the past, whatever it is, millions of years. It's fascinating. So do you sometimes advocate melatonin supplements?
Yeah, I do. I use them quite a lot. You can use it as part of a kind of anti-aging protocol. The problem is that melatonin disappeared off the shelves in the pharmacies here about 20 years ago because there was lots of really exciting medical research starting to come out about melatonin. And foolishly, the importers started making medical claims. So the authorities said, right, you're making medical claims for it. Therefore it's a pharmaceutical. It's a medication. We want millions of bucks to put it through our regulatory things. But you can buy it over the counter in the States, I think, and in Southeast
the States
Asia.
You can. In the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, you can't.
Yeah. So it is on prescription here. I don't know if it is in the UK.
I think so. Did you can prescribe it? Can you?
Yeah, it is prescription. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It's much more expensive than it needs to be. And people can, if they get a prescription, they can just buy internet and import it, and as long as they've got a doctor, they can get it in.
They can import
but
it.
Again, I think that there's yards and yards of stuff still to come out about the importance of melatonin.
What sort of doses? What sort of doses there, Matt? Is it?
You can get it in a wide range of doses, and like other things that occur in nature, not all of them, but there's generally a fairly wide kind of safe dosage range with things that you find in the diet, or you can come to harm, with if you're really, really silly. But most, a milligram seems to be the kind of average doses that people take.
Is that what you prescribe me? If I was your patient, you'd prescribe me a milligram. That would be what you.
Yeah, or 3 milligrams or 0.5 milligrams. Often people can work out for themselves what seems to be the sweet spot.
Right.
Often melatonin less is more. Some people who take it would say that they actually wake up earlier. They don't, so it depends why you're taking it. If you're deficient melatonin and you can't sleep, and that does the job, you'll sleep longer. People who take it just because they want to, stay well or whatever, may find they actually sleep a little bit less, but they're sleeping more deeply. And what melatonin does is it helps you fit in more sleep cycles.
Right.
And the deep sleep is deeper.
Yep.
And we know with age that there's more faffing about the brain does between the sleep cycles. We should be trying to pack in, 8 or more, cycles between the deep restorative sleep and the REM sleep, where we're, only just asleep, the dream sleep. So melatonin really seems to have its effect in that way. So healthy teenagers, they sleep the sleep of the dead, because they've got high melatonin levels, but less and less of them do, and that does worry me too, because it's also related to insulin resistance, which will encourage you to gain weight, and be hungry all the time. So and again, it's very cheap to make, it's natural to the body, you can't patent it, there's no money in it. It's almost like there's a theme here, isn't it?
Everything you say just makes so much sense. It's just restoring that which is natural, isn't it? So you're not talking about supplements for the sake of supplements. You're just talking about supplements to restore the natural physiological homeostatic level of these things that we would have if we had an optimized hunter-gatherer lifestyle. So
thank God we don't have to live in caves anymore. I'm not advocating that we eat raw meat and freeze to death half the time. That'd be no fun at all. But we've come a long, long way from the sort of the physical pillars that support our chemistry.
As a hunter-gatherer, I'd be eating meat, so I'd get plenty of zinc. I'd be out early in the morning and hunting animals and foraging for roots, so I get lots of melatonin from the sunlight, and I got lots of vitamin D from the sunlight.
You got it.
And in other words, these are three deficiencies that are a problem that are associated with modern life. That's not what we are designed for from our hunter-gatherer past.
No, that's right. So get off your computer and go outside, John.
Well, as soon as this is finished, yeah.
Go catch some rabbits.
And the exercise and the movement. Yeah. So
and that's another whole fascinating, arena for being able to, optimize immune function. And what's the best exercise, and what are we most designed for, and what most quickly gets your glucose down. Because we touched on the glucose and the endothelial cells, but insulin is also a key player in this. And there's essentially the diabetes and the obesity epidemic is all about an epidemic of insulin resistance. Higher levels of insulin in the blood, and that really drives inflammation also, and sets you up for a much more exaggerated and kind of collateral damage. When you are dealing with a critter like COVID-19 or something like that.
So we could reduce the amount of suffering and death from this COVID-19 pandemic in the world if no one was deficient in zinc, melatonin, vitamin D, and everyone exercised and moved more. That would make a material difference, wouldn't it? I really believe that.
And that's my personal view as well. And I think there's a lot of evidence in support of that. And as a rule of thumb, about 1% of the health budget in the Western world is put towards prevention. Only 1%. Most of it's paying for the drugs and the high-tech machines and things like that. Yeah. So I think we've gone a long way in the wrong direction, really. And this has really shown this up. And I think it's a tragic waste of time, while we're all glued to the news and listening to people who, really command our attention. The Faucis and the Matt Hancocks and our presidents and prime ministers and things.
Yeah.
And they could be telling us this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, vitamin D is never. Every time people talk about the discrepancy in morbidity and mortality in different ethnic groups, they jump straight to the sociological, economic explanation.
It's breathtaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the ability to ignore, what is staring you in the face.
Simple biology.
You can't fight it. You can't fight physics and chemistry. You can choose to ignore it, but the ramifications are there in front of our eyes.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, I'm certainly advocating that the darker coloured skin, the more you consider vitamin D status, it would be. I mean, ideally, everyone would have the vitamin D measured and titrated up to as you say, 100, 120. Yeah, that would be the ideal situation.
It costs money. It's not a particularly cheap test.
Right.
And certainly we've kind of been told a number of times, look, if you think somebody might be deficient in vitamin D, don't worry about the test, just put them on vitamin D. And that's fine as far as it goes, but it means that we're missing the opportunity to get data to really prove how relevant vitamin D level is to all sorts of conditions, autoimmunity, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, obesity, depression, heart disease, cancer, of course. But I mean, this work has already been done, but it's just, roundly ignored.
So vitamin D, adequate lack of vitamin D is implicated in diseases like ischemic heart disease.
There's certainly an association. There, the debate is still, around, is this causal or is it an association? But certainly in terms of if you then look at inflammation and you look at the role that vitamin D plays in regulating immune attack and our defenses and things, it becomes much more obvious. I mean, vitamin D is a hormone. It's got such a wide array of jobs, and round about a third of all genes in the body are directly or indirectly affected by vitamin D status.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It's active in the nucleus of every cell in the body.
Wow. Every nucleus in every cell in the body has got vitamin D receptors.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's incredible. So vitamin D is ensuring that there's adequate immunity, but it's also suppressing down excessive inflammatory responses of that immunity.
That seems to be it. Yeah. Certainly not having enough makes you a sitter for more inflammatory responses.
It really is a Goldilocks zone type thing, isn't it? Not too much, not too little.
Yeah.
So I can see the scheme.
But as I say, you don't, you should worry more about getting enough rather than getting too much.
Yeah.
And you're simply not allowed to buy, buy high enough dose.
I lost that bit.
So we can prescribe 50,000. We've got 50,000 IU capsules if we're wanting to get somebody up to level. So people on rest homes typically are on one of those once a month. But the Europeans a few years ago were looking at using once yearly doses of 500,000 units.
Really?
As a sort of preventative, looking to preserve bone mass and to help prevent the loss of muscle that's part of the aging process. In fact, that's the main feature of aging is loss of muscle, actually, and so much of everything else takes its cue from what's going on. And that's also been, that is an inflammatory response. It's an active inflammatory process, losing bone mass, losing muscle. And vitamin D seems to mitigate against that. So, maybe so much of what we've assumed is, inevitable actually isn't if we.
Yeah. But again, presumably it's better to give a weekly dose rather than a monthly dose or a yearly dose.
Yeah, it just feels more physiologically kind of in sympathy, doesn't it, to do it that way.
Yeah, it's mimicking the natural situation more accurately, isn't it, by doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're designed to take it a few months of the year and then feed off it for the rest of the year.
Yes. So do you think that the inflammatory...
It's supposed to be seasonal.
Yeah. So do you think the inflammatory, the damping down inflammation, if the vitamin D is damping down the inflammation, you don't have enough vitamin D. Do you think that could account for some of the cancers that are associated with low levels of vitamin D, that you get chronic inflammation?
Look, there's no doubt. I mean, when you're low in vitamin D, you make more TNF alpha, interleukin 6, and these are very helpful cytokines for cancer cells to have, floating around. And practically every cancer studied has been, shown to be related to vitamin D levels. Your chances of getting cancer and your prognosis, your chances of surviving it. And there was a very elegant model proposed called the Dynamit, DINOMIT, and that's an acronym for every stage of the induction and the progress of cancer through to metastasis being influenced by the roles of vitamin D.
Wow.
Dynamit. So it's worth having a look at. It was a model that was proposed, and there was certainly some good biological plausibility to that, and all the pathways have been worked out.
It could also be an explanation as to why obesity is a factor in so many cancers as well, because you've said that people that are obese are more likely to be low in vitamin D. So that could be an explanatory mechanism for that potentially.
Absolutely, and they're also higher in insulin and higher in glucose, and be deficient because they're overfed but undernourished. These people have often got micronutrient deficiencies.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, what do you think about the possible role in neurodegenerative diseases, Matt?
With vitamin D?
Vitamin D deficiency in neurodegenerative diseases, like Parkinson's disease, dementia, motor neuron disease, potentially.
Well, I mean, the main one that stands out is MS. Multiple sclerosis, and there's been a sunlight and a vitamin D part of that. Certainly, again, vitamin D deficiency does predict MS. With things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, it's not so clear, but certainly MS is the standout one, but inflammation is behind many of the chronic diseases that we get. And I'm sure in many people vitamin D is in there playing a part. But it's multifactorial, of course. We know that everybody's overnourished and particularly carbohydrate issues with high insulin, which is a very inflammatory hormone that'll drive inflammation as well. So it's a big sort of complex picture, isn't it?
It is, but I just love the way you integrate the accurate physiology with such common sense medical implications. It's great. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the basic medical sciences is it's why we went into this stuff, isn't it? And what we learned. And it seems that then, you're encouraged to just forget about it, when you're actually wrestling with disease and illness and things.
Yeah.
But you can't fight chemistry. And as you said the other day, follow the truth wherever it leads. And for me, it's all about biochemical pathways and physics and chemistry, really.
It is, but I just love the way it also makes sense of a philosophical approach to a more natural lifestyle. So, it kind of satisfies you on a philosophical level, but it also satisfies you on a scientific level, which is another reason I believe that what you're saying is absolutely true, and it's great. I think that's about all I can think to ask you at the moment, Matt. That's absolutely brilliant. I really appreciate it.
Well, we've covered a heck of a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. If anyone's got to the end of this, congratulations.
We barely did.
I know there's been a few sound dropouts, but I mean, just to go back over a few of the things. One other question. The comorbidities that have been identified that are associated with more COVID-19 disease. Yes. For example, the high blood pressure. For example, the diabetes. To what degree do you think good control of hypertension and good control of diabetes will improve the immunity? I mean, do you think the worse control of the diabetes, the more likely someone is to have the severe COVID disease?
Well, I mean, that's seeming how it's turning out, and I think, in a nutshell, yes. And I couldn't agree more. And the stats say actually how quickly risks drop away once you change your lifestyle. And all the complications we know of from diabetes and things, particularly vascular disease, stroke, heart attacks, that type of stuff. Risk really does drop very fast. And more quickly than you might see on the scales, or if you're checking your blood sugar, even. Because if you can get your body listening to insulin again. So it puts the responsibility, to give the right information, and support it to make these changes. And the problem is that every step of the way, there's somebody wanting to, confound these behaviors and take money off us, by marketing, easy foods, easy solutions, synthetic this, rapid that, cheap the other, and things. So we're really up against it. And if the one thing I would really want to come out of this epidemic is that people do wake up and realize, how much of what they do themselves, can determine what happens to them. It's a slow motion train wreck that's accelerating, and thank God countries like yours and mine are either at the peak, just coming over it, or have largely passed it. But what we eat and how we live, how we think, we know these things all very, very, much more relevant than whether or not, we can stay alive until there's a vaccine. And of course, I hope there will be, and I hope it will be soon. But it's not easy. It's not easy technology.
That's great, Matt. Matt, I really appreciate the time you've taken. I know it's your day off. No, I do hope your family's not too cross with me for taking up too much of your time.